Hey, what's up and welcome to the Beyond Sundays podcast. I'm the host, Brett Stewart. Today, my co-host back with me is Braden Crow.
Back again. It's
and
good to be here.
We were given notice, no impressions for a while.
Not this time.
If you didn't hear Braden's Seinfeld impression, it is on part 2 of our conversation with Eddie Smith. Which, speaking of that conversation, it was actually a really great 2-part episode with Eddie Smith. And our conversation today is kind of a continuation on a similar line of thinking, of really just discerning calling and assignment and purpose. And so we have Jake Mills with us. Jake is no stranger to the podcast. But Braden was telling me the other day about this teaching that Jake has that he loves to take young leaders through, just regarding the difference between calling versus assignment. And so honestly, I haven't heard the teaching, but I was so intrigued by the idea that I just wanted to bring Jake on and let's talk through this, because like Braden, you said just a little bit ago, I think that this is something that so many people deal with in trying to determine, what am I doing? What am I supposed to do? Am I where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah, I mean, I for sure have wrestled with that, and this teaching, I mean, Jake's kind of walked me through it, and we are blessed in the missions department to pretty much always have an intern with us, and we really prioritize.
That must be really nice.
It is very nice. They are awesome, and but yeah, we really love to pour into them, and as young leaders, and this is one of those teachings that we've done, and we've seen a lot of fruit in it. So
Jake, kind of take us through some of the points of it, and honestly, we're just going to create conversation and questions going off of it.
Yeah. So I'll start with just kind of a little bit of my journey. I was an intern here at Beltway, and
years ago,
many years.
I was an obnoxious eighth grade
grader,
kid when Jake was a 19-year-old intern.
Spastic little boy. But now you're different. Anyways, so there was just kind of a teaching. It was really popular to kind of talk about youth ministry at the time as hey, youth ministry is not a stepping stone. You need to be in youth ministry forever, if you're going to be a youth pastor.
Yeah.
And so I became a youth pastor because, generally that's what you do if you want to go into ministry and you're 22 or whatever. And so while I was in college, I accepted a youth pastor position at New Hope Church here in Abilene and had an awesome time on staff there. But I really thought that I would be a youth pastor forever. And I felt like, God, I don't want to use this as a stepping stone. I want to be in this. And some people had kind of modeled that. And I thought that's good. So I'm going to go deep with kids, with students, and be a youth pastor forever. And that's my calling. My calling is to be a youth pastor. Mm-hmm. Well, a year and a half into being a youth pastor, I took a mission trip to China with some students, a lot of students. And my wife, Erin, and I both were praying. This is before kids. We were both praying during this prayer walk in around the Great Goose Pagoda in Xi'an, China. And both came together afterwards and said, man, God's been told me something weird. What did he tell you? Well, he told you go first, it's kind of that thing. And it was that, we were supposed to come back to China. And so then we felt called to come back to China. And so we started that process. Everybody was supportive. New Hope was our sending church. It was great. And Beltway and New Hope were our sending churches. And we went to China, and I was a missionary. And I really thought I'd be a missionary forever. And I thought that was my calling. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be a missionary. Well, then when we came back for furlough after doing the missionary to China thing for about 5 years, felt the Lord leading us to, we had one kid at this time, Kennedy, to pastor churches and to lean into a gifting to teach. And it was hard. It was one of the worst, transitions of my life, just because I loved being in China. Absolutely loved it. Felt like the Lord said, if you stay in China, I will bless you because you're sacrificing for me, but it won't be my preferred will for your life. And so it was hard. It's hard to tell leaders and stuff. I was, a leader and going to be a leader in our organization. and our team in China, and everybody thought, we were kind of poster children for what was going on. So then I became a lead pastor, and I thought, you know what? I'm called. I was in Wisconsin, Green Bay, Wisconsin, the frozen tundra, and I'm called to be a lead pastor. I'm going to be a lead pastor in this church forever. And then about 4 years later, God orchestrated this crazy thing, and we were able, we were called out. We were moved out, and it was really, really good. And the church is just killing it now. And we saw that church turn around from, asking people to bring toilet paper so that we had toilet paper in the bathrooms because we didn't have any money and everybody was gone, to, a church of like 350 and doing things for Jesus in the community. Then I go to Illinois and lead pastor, and I'm going to be there forever. I mean, we bought a house, did the whole thing, started foster care, and you can listen to that story a little bit more. It was a horrific, ending, just a bad situation right in the middle of COVID. You can listen to that on Flip the Script. I preached a sermon and talked about it. But through a series of events out of my control, completely out of my control, I ended up not a lead pastor. And now I'm here at Beltway. I'm a missions outreach pastor. And so, in that first transition from youth pastor to missionary, I began to kind of develop this understanding of calling and ask questions about calling. And what I came down to was this idea, this principle that calling and assignment are not the same thing. And so, when I have a calling, it can't be the same as my assignment, because if I think, and it can't be the same as my vocation, if I think I'm called to be a blank, you fill in the blank, what happens when you retire?
Right.
Because if you retire at 65 and you live to 85, are those 20 years just living outside of your calling?
Yeah. And that's even something similar, referring back to the podcast with Eddie Smith, of like, you had a purpose before you were working, you have a purpose during, you have a purpose after. And even while you're talking, and I'll let you get back to it, Jake, but I just wrote down, we can't limit our calling to our assignment.
Yes. And so the way I would say that is that, we need to look at our assignment through the lens of our calling, not our calling through the lens of our assignment. And so just because I'm here right now doing this thing that God wants me to do, I mean, equally wants me to do, either way you look at it, but he wants me to do this thing. That doesn't mean this thing or this position or this title is my calling. And so I got to look at my assignment and think, okay, is this the same as my calling, and how does it move me towards my calling, or how can I find my calling within my assignment, but not get those two things confused? Yeah. And so, it helps on both sides. Like when you're thinking, this isn't my final destination, or are you thinking it is your final destination? Either way, it helps, because when it's not your final destination, this assignment that you're in right now, you can get some freedom out of knowing that, this is just an assignment, but I need to give it my all. This is God gave me this assignment. And so I know he's called me to this larger. So if you think of it like if I was drawing on a whiteboard, I would draw kind of an umbrella, half circle, and that's my calling. And then underneath that, maybe a few different things. Those are my assignments through the years. And so, I have to look at so for me personally, I've come down to my calling, what God has called me. Now, this is outside of, I don't want people to get off track here. This is outside of everybody's calling as a Christ follower, and my calling as a father and a husband. So those are kind of separate things. I'm talking mainly about ministry or vocational calling. Okay. So I feel like my calling that the Lord has kind of narrowed down for me is to preach and teach the Word of God in a way that people can understand it, apply it, and pass it on. Yeah. And so that's a real general calling. I believe that's what he's supposed to do. So right now in this podcast, I'm operating in my calling.
In your calling.
Because that's what God has called me to do.
Right.
So then I look at each of my assignments, and I can go back, hindsight's 2020, and I can plan forward, and I look at right now, but I can see how in each assignment, my calling was flowing through that assignment. Does that make sense? And so as a missions outreach pastor at Beltway Park, if you compare me to other missions outreach pastors, they've got maybe a different calling on their life.
Sure.
And so it's going to look differently. In fact,
Right.
Braden can kind of speak to that just because he's one of the people that I lead within my department. But so I'm going to be heavy on teaching and heavy on explaining and heavy on discipleship. And I love that stuff. And so I can look at this and go, I know I'm going to be a lead pastor again someday. Everybody knows that. But not everybody, but I just mean everybody here at Beltway, like the leadership and stuff. It's not a shocking thing. I'm going to be a lead pastor again. I'm pretty sure. But me as a missions outreach pastor, I'm not outside of my calling. I'm just in a different assignment.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, and you, to what you said, like just to give practicality to it, of you're looking at your assignment through the lens of your calling. And so, I'm sure as you saw a job description, it's, you're looking and you understand your calling. Because you understand your calling, you're able to see the assignment in a totally different way. It's okay. I know I need to keep up with partners. I know that we're going to put on mission trips. I know that I'm going to oversee a staff, but at the same time, I can teach the Word of God to everyone I'm interacting with in a way that they understand it, they can apply it, and they can pass it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even, as a lead pastor, I started to realize that I read an article or a Facebook thing or something one time that talked about this, kind of narrowed it down to two kinds of lead pastors. You're either a teacher who leads or a leader who teaches. And that's probably too narrow. I understand that, but I would be a teacher who leads in that dichotomy. And that gave me some freedom when I read that. I thought, okay, I do like leading, and I believe God's gifted me in leadership, but the main ways he's gifted me in leadership are tied to teaching and explaining and moving people along the path. And so even as a lead pastor, so you might think like, well, as a lead pastor, you're preaching all the time and your calling is to teach and preach the Word of God in the way that people understand and apply it and pass it on. And so that's just like, boom. But that's not, that really fits. But as a lead pastor, man, depending on the size of your church, you're doing a million different things.
Yeah.
And so I have to learn, each of us has to learn. Everybody has to do stuff that doesn't perfectly align with their gifting and calling within their vocation, within their job. And so I have to learn, what are those things, but how can I leverage my calling within this assignment as best as I can?
Yeah.
And so for me, it looked like this. As a lead pastor, it looked like what we called chalk talks. So staff meetings, one of my main things was to do a chalk talk. I didn't lead a lot of the administrative, what are we doing with this or that? Somebody else did that because they had that gifting. I gave a 20-minute chalk talk about leadership or scripture or whatever it is that we could all learn from, answered questions, and then we moved to another. So no matter the assignment, I need to look at how does my calling, and it ties to gifting, right?
Yeah.
Your calling is always tied to your gifting, but sometimes you have giftings that are outside of your calling, and sometimes your calling stretches new giftings, right? But better than that, maybe more clearly, your assignment oftentimes, has, some things that you're doing that don't feel like they're in your gifting.
Yeah.
But you still got to stretch that out, right? But you don't want to spend all your time in a place where you're not in your gifting and not in your calling. And that's when, you're out maybe. Maybe you made a mistake and you've been given an assignment, or you jumped into an assignment that's actually outside of your gifting and calling. You got to get back to under that umbrella.
Or maybe, you took an assignment that you thought, oh, this will be great. I'll grow in this. But then as you get into the details and the day-to-day of that assignment, this is where we would find, like with the life plan with Eddie, you would discover I'm just misaligned. Like this is, it can still be the Lord, but I just might not be very aligned with this. And so, Braden, I know like for you, you've found some areas in your life to kind of supplement areas where maybe the assignment doesn't fulfill every longing or joy or gift that you have. But I really think freeing ourselves from the expectation that the assignment has to fulfill the calling, indefinitely, fully. I know a lot of our listeners and even just a lot of our our demographic here at Beltway is young adults. And, speaking as a young adult, and Braden's a young adult, and Jake is also a young adult. He literally, he said ish. Young adult-ish.
I don't know, when is young adult over? I don't know when that is. I'm 37.
Here at Beltway, we say it's for those that are in their 20s and 30s.
Okay.
30s. I'm there for
you're there.
I'll give it
years.
to you.
But
I don't need it. I don't feel like a young adult.
yeah, he's got 6 kids.
I got 6 kids. I don't feel like I'm in young adult land, but whatever.
But something that we'll just say it like this, the millennial generation, we feel like we have to figure it all out right now, or that our next job that we get, like that has to be our career. It has to be, we're going hard at this until we're 60, and then maybe things change after that. And there's this tendency, and it's fueled by a desire to, one, be productive in your giftings and to have joy in it. And I get that. And it's a beautiful thing that's within inside our generation. But often it creates a lot of discontentment or displacement, because then there's this confusion of like, man, like I got it wrong. This doesn't line up. I'm not going to do this forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is a really good conversation to break down, especially for that demographic. But really anybody listening, because like you said, maybe someone listening right now is approaching retirement within the next couple of years. And this is what, that you've put a lot of your thought and your time and your effort towards for decades. Like, then what? How do you find your calling that remains the same and continues to adapt in the midst of a different assignment?
Yeah, and I think, we've talked about this before, but it does brush up against identity. And, some of the highest levels, percentages, probability of depression is in retirees, people who are right after retirement. And it's because we've tied up our, identity and our calling into our assignment. And so now what do?
Yeah.
For 40 years, I've done this thing.
Yeah.
Now I'm not doing it. Now who am I without this thing? And it's the same thing with being a father or a mother.
I was about to say, statistically, those
Divorce,
who become empty nesters after having, a kid in their home 18 to 20 or maybe even 26 years, I don't know. That's a big thing to wrestle through when identity gets too interlocked around an assignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the second most, likely time for a couple to get divorced. The first is the first 2 years of marriage. The second is right after you become empty nesters, because, your identity, or in that case, your marriage, your relationship has been tied up in being mom and dad. So now we're not mom and dad. What defines us?
Yeah.
And we haven't done the work of making sure we have a foundation outside of our kids. And so, so calling, assignment, identity, it's gifting. Those 4 things are all kind of swirling in this, and we need to be careful that we don't get our identity, the core of our identity, from a specific assignment, because assignments change. And when you're a young adult or whatever, and I agree, we deal with a lot of young adults in the workplace and young leaders who really want to have it all right now, and it's from a good place, like you said, but it's like I'm not called to this. I'm not called to make phone calls, or whatever. I'm not called to answer a bunch of emails, or I'm called to this other thing, and they feel like this isn't fulfilling their calling. I got to get out of here, and they jump to something else, or they're just mad or whatever, and they just keep jumping because they're confused about that. But if they could just understand, this is just one assignment, maybe my first assignment. And it goes back to that principle, Jesus saying, be faithful in the little things, the first things, and then I'll give you much. Let's be faithful in that assignment. Wherever God, if you're listening right now, wherever God has you right now, if it's not lining up, perfectly, and it's not just like this dream job, lining up with your calling and all that, but you feel like God has put you there, be faithful. Yeah. Be faithful there. And find freedom in the fact that your now is not your never. No. your now is not your forever. Sorry.
Your now is, I was like, okay, yeah, I think that makes
Sorry.
sense.
Your
But
now is not
now,
forever.
yes,
You know,
there it is.
And so I it's okay. I'm gonna be somewhere, especially if you're a young adult. You for sure. you're gonna be
somewhere
there's
else.
gonna be an assignment, that comes after this, and you shouldn't be jumping from thing to thing to thing. But you should be faithful where you're at, and the way you can do that is by spending some time talking to God about your overall calling, separate from your assignments, your overall calling. And then you look at this assignment and you go, how do I leverage that calling and gifting in this assignment? And that will bring satisfaction that you haven't gotten yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on that point, I've noticed that whenever I can understand my calling and can look at my assignment through the lens of my calling, there's just a level of thankfulness and satisfaction, like you were saying, of, oh my goodness, this lines up better than I thought. It may not line up perfectly still, but this lines up better than I thought, and there's a lot of leverage I can use every single day in the job and the assignment that God has sovereignly put me in, that I can use the calling He gave me to do it. So
I think about you're a good example of that with, just your calling to like see the gift and desire and dream in other people and to help them accomplish that.
Yeah.
And, you're associate missions outreach pastor here at Beltway, and you might think those two things don't go together, but they do. And Braden finds his calling in this assignment on a daily basis. Yeah. And he does some other stuff he likes to do too. That's the other thing. Just because you're called to one thing doesn't mean you may like doing 7 other things. So you can find satisfaction in other things. I also think about Karen Graves. Karen.
Shout out to Karen.
Shout out to Karen. She's our benevolence pastor here at Beltway. Benevolence is a word that's kind of weird. It means we're going to pay your bills, basically. You need some. So if you're listening and you're in need, you have utility bills that you're struggling or whatever, you can call our church and you can ask for benevolence, ask for Karen, and you'll talk with her. So in general at churches, benevolence ministry and benevolence directors and pastors are like real number crunchers and just like, I'm just going to like yes or no on bill. And it's kind of a arduous, I mean, you'd have to like that stuff, but it's kind of an arduous job. So, but Karen is 100% not that. And she is so called to evangelism, to lead people to Jesus one-on-one. Yep. She wouldn't say she's a preacher, but to lead, she is a preacher. She
definitely is.
She wouldn't say that, but she's going to lead people. So our benevolence ministry, people are calling and asking about bills or doing meetings.
They're coming in for water bills, and then
they're
leaving
water.
saved.
They're leaving saved or healed or like, and then their family's going to be affected and changed and transformed by that. And I'm just like, oh my gosh,
and it's
Karen,
not
that's
like,
so awesome.
It's not like, here and there. It's like every day, every week.
Yep.
I mean, we're just like, who got saved this week? Like they come in and they've got these desperate things, and she'll tell you, it's a hook. I'm getting them in, and I'm going to help them either way. They don't have to give their lives to Jesus for me to help them with the utility bill. I'm going to help them either way. But she gets past that real quick. She goes, okay, I understand your situation. We're going to pay $150. We're going to take care of you. We love you. But let me tell you why I really, have you here. Let me tell you why you're really here. Yeah. And she jumps into a clear gospel presentation, and people give their lives to Jesus. They come to Beltway. They end up in life groups, whatever. Yeah. And that's a great example of, it seems like the assignment doesn't fit the gifting and the calling.
Right.
But it's an odd pair, but Karen has figured out, from day one, how to leverage that calling and gifting within an assignment that maybe other people wouldn't be able to do that same thing.
Yeah, and that goes, I wrote down, and I was going to kind of speak to this, but Karen is a perfect example of that, of when you can free yourself from the assignment having to fulfill the calling or just line up perfectly. Honestly, when you become comfortable in who you are, comfortable and confident in who you are, the gifts God's given you, and the calling on your life, you have a sense of freedom and power that comes from, you know what? I'm in this place right now. It's not my forever place, but I'm going to let like who I am, how the Lord has equipped me, how he has gifted me, I'm going to let that flow out in every possible, way. And I've experienced this in the last few years of just, I've noticed even in myself, like I've always been a confident personality. Sometimes it's just cockiness, or sometimes it's actually insecurity, like masking itself as confidence. But truly, in the last couple years, as I've learned more of myself and become more confident in who God has called me and how he has equipped me, there's kind of this freedom and power of like, I don't know. It just kind of sets you free and it lights you up so that whatever platform you have, whatever opportunity, whether it's a stage you step on, or if it's a room you step into, or it's a phone that you pick up to make a call, like you can let your giftings and your passions and your convictions, what God has put in your heart to do, you can let that happen anytime, any place. And it's a sense of freedom that, you know what, this job doesn't line up perfectly. It's not forever, but I'm going to have joy and freedom in using and growing the gifts that God has given me.
And the next step of that too, I think, is that, realizing this job doesn't line up, this assignment doesn't line up perfectly with my gifting and calling, to go from that to no
Yep.
assignment will line up perfectly with your gifting and calling. You can get closer, and you can find it easier to find satisfaction within it. But really, it's up to you to find satisfaction in the assignment that if God's the one calling you to it, moving you to this assignment, then it's up to you. You gotta find the satisfaction that he's got there for you. It's there. You just gotta look for it, and you gotta be okay and learn to. I mean, there is something to be said. There's joy in serving in things you don't love, just helping in ways that within that assignment that you go, it's stretching. For me, it is.
Yeah.
For me, it's stretching to go, okay, I'm going to do this. I don't love this, but I'm going to do this thing because it's a part of my assignment.
Yeah.
And usually in that, I find Jesus is strong and the Holy Spirit helps me. And you know what I mean?
And usually it almost feels like a privilege to be stretched in the assignment because you're sure of your calling, your assignment isn't forever. And so whenever you see the hardships or these opportunities to be stretched and grow, it's this is going to be brutal, or this is going to be tough. But the end all be all is not the assignment. The end all be all is the calling. And so,
even just the language of like, man, I really don't love to do this. More times than not, it's because we either feel robbed or like, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This isn't me. And so there is a freedom and a joy and a power that comes in when it's like, you know what? You can love and serve and teach, or whatever your giftings are, you can do that despite the opportunity, or despite what you have to do, or what you get to do, or what you can say yes to. So you're absolutely right in that. Yeah.
I think that, I want to be clear that my hope is that I'm in one place until I retire. Like that's always been my hope. When I was in China, I hoped I would be there till retirement. When I was in Wisconsin and Illinois, I hoped I would be there till retirement. I would always say it like this to the people I led, that, I gave my geography to Jesus a long time ago. And so he tells me where to go, and I do my best to understand that, hear that, in the counsel of many, all of that, try to do my best to hear that. But I gave my geography to him. However, I'm hoping that I'm sticking around. My hope is this, this is what, I don't have any plans. That's what I've always told me. I don't have any plans to move or to do this or to do that. So there's nothing wrong with, I think it's a blessing, a huge blessing, if the Lord gives you one place or, one assignment. Usually it's not, like, you even think about people who have been here a long time. Like Brett, how long have you been at Beltway?
Almost 7 years.
So what did you start out as?
7 years on staff this round. I too was an intern back in the day. Let's see. So I started out when I came on staff full time as young adults and guest services.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was your assignment. And so, you could think, well, I'm going to be a young adults pastor, guest services guy forever. But that didn't happen. So you stayed geographically in Abilene and working at Beltway, but still within that, your assignment changed, right? Yep. Changed to groups pastor from there?
Yeah, young adults in groups. And then it ended up overseeing, I got to teach a bunch, and then I was starting to be used like for some of the video stuff that we do. And then, hey, fill in this need for online. And then now
you're online campus pastor.
The online campus pastor.
Yep. Braden's similar, shorter amount of time, but started out as...
Yeah, I've been here
as an unpaid intern.
Yeah, that's another story. Yeah, started off as an unpaid intern, ended up being a part-time administrative assistant for our communications pastor at the time, and then stepped into doing some research for Pastor David, and then stepped into local outreach ministry, and just recently, about a year ago, have been doing local outreach and worldwide missions.
So even within one place, you have these different assignments, right? And that's okay. That's good. Yeah. But I think it's good to hope that you're going to be in one place, and your family's going to be in one place, and to maybe even strive for that.
Yeah.
But there's freedom to be found in the idea that God may have different assignments for me. And listen, there is no better place to be than smack dab in the middle of God's will for my life.
Yeah.
And so I submit my calling, assignment, gifting to the will of God for my life.
Yeah.
And that trumps everything else. I have to try to listen for his will, because even if I use my brain and this whole, language of assignment and calling and gifting, and I'm like, I don't know if this is going to fit or whatever. But God says, go, I go. Doesn't matter, you know. I have to trust him in that. So there's no better place to be. Even if you think, it's way better to have my kids in one school district their whole lives. Not if that's not God's will for their lives. If it's God's will for their lives that you go plant a church, or, go start a business, or take this position in, Georgia or whatever. Like if that's God's will, then it will be better for your kids there than it is here.
Yeah. And do we believe that what God has, even if it looks different, even if we equate it to less than what our expectations were, do we believe that what God has is best? In fact, Pastor David recently did a sermon on just that, on not settling for less than best. And so it kind of comes down to faith. Like, do we believe that whatever the Lord has is best? But a side note or a caveat to that is, like, don't stay in an unhealthy place, or like don't stay in a place where you are totally misaligned. Surround yourself with wise counsels. Take advantage of some of the resources that we've talked about here on the podcast and some of the different episodes, and do some personality tests and strengths finders tests, and kind of get a better grid for who you are and how you've been created and wired, and what things the Lord has put inside of you, so that you can identify, I am completely misaligned. No wonder I don't have much joy or ability to have vision for my life or for my work. And, through a process, you don't have to just jump ship immediately, but through a process, really seek the Lord. Okay, what is it, Lord, that you have for me? Is it to continue to stay? I've had seasons, honestly, where I was feeling some stirrings to do something different, and the Lord was like, hey, walk through every open door and seek me in the process. And so it literally led to the point of I was given an offer letter for a different position, for a different organization, for a different assignment, and it was probably what I wanted it to be or expected it to be, and I got that letter, and I just couldn't sign it. I didn't have the peace. And then I felt the Lord say, like, hey, thanks for seeking me in this. I love you. I want you to stay where you are because I'm growing you. And so you just got to seek the Lord and trust whatever he has, it is best. But it is possible to be in a misaligned, unhealthy place. And if that's the case, depend on community and wisdom and mentors and resources to kind of help you.
Yeah. So Jake, one question I have for you, and I just was thinking, putting myself in the shoes of anyone listening to this, what would be a good first step for someone who may not be able to articulate their calling? They feel like calling and maybe they've been in a job for a while, or they keep job hopping and they can't figure out what sticks. And so what would be a good starting point on really being able to articulate calling? I mean, obviously seek the Lord, but beyond that, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think first of all, just understanding that it's a longer process maybe than you realize. Mm-hmm. And, it's not like, okay, this Saturday from 1 to 4, I'm going to sit down and knock this out. It just doesn't usually happen that way. So you have a longer process of seeking the Lord, of praying. I think counsel, getting the counsel of wise people around you that know you is good. Reaching out to experts like Eddie Smith, if you wanted to go through that process, that life plan process will help you understand your calling and whether or not your assignments are lining up with that, or you're outside of it or inside of it or whatever. All of that is really, really good. Read some books on what that looks like. I felt like the Lord over time refined my understanding of my calling, and I have it now, and I'm confident in it. But I also know that there's a measure of imperfection in that, and I wouldn't be freaked out if in 5 years He refines it for me again, and I understand it better. I hope I understand it better in 5 years. So don't, if you hear me say my calling statement or mission statement or whatever, and you're like, oh my gosh, he obviously knows that. I didn't for a long time,
right?
And it may be that the Lord reveals more or refines it down to less in the future. And so don't kill yourself to come up with some pithy thing.
And some of that is refined or solidified or defined in really difficult seasons.
In experience,
Like that is part of faith. There is this theology of suffering that we try to get away from, but really it's in the midst of such difficult places that we encounter the divine in a different way, and everything that we depend on is stripped away, yet He remains. And then we find and discover more of who the Lord is and who we are in Him. And so the downs, the negatives, the suffering, the disappointments, the discouragement, that's not wasted. It plays part in what God is doing and refining and clarifying for you.
Yeah. And I think so there's a longer process. I don't have a lot of step 1, step 2, step 3. I think spend some time thinking and praying about it, like good long time, having conversations with people and writing some things down.
Thinking about what transcends the job you're currently in would probably help.
What parts of your job, feel like they align with something inside of you, and maybe use that. That was part of my process was, what do I feel like I just get the most joy out of?
Yeah, what things bring you joy?
And, and kind of asking the Lord about that and seeing, how that, and so, yeah, I think it's just a longer process, and then hold it tightly, but hold it loosely. Like hold it tightly in the sense that I'm going to use this to understand my assignments and myself, obviously, and I'm gonna say it confidently and believe that I understand it. But I'm going to hold it loosely in the sense that it's okay if if God it's not like you failed 5 years ago because you said your calling was this other thing. Again, if we're flipping calling every 2 years completely, then probably we're talking about assignment,
right?
Not calling. So hopefully that, if you're listening and you're wondering about that, hopefully that even just that vocabulary helps you kind of make those decisions.
And I do think, and I'm going to speak to this because I feel like I've seen it in my own life and in the lives of those that I've walked with, of sometimes the Lord will hold off or delay your assignment because He's forming your heart. Like, it's not so much about the position, it's about your purpose, because you can have a platform in whatever position you're in. Mm-hmm. But so often we anticipate, that next position where I'm going to be next, that's where I'm going to be fulfilled. That's where this thing in me is going to get to come alive. This is where I'm going to get to be generous, or I'm going to get to be a good leader, or I'm going to get to be considerate, or I'm going to get to be steadfast or meditative. And so we keep like off-putting, like, oh, I'll be this when this comes. But truly, the Lord has no problem holding an assignment that you will be in. He has no problem holding it so that as you seek him, there's something in you that forms even more, because he is way more concerned about who you are becoming rather than what you are doing. And so there's a difference between your position and your purpose, and the Lord wants you to find your purpose. And once you find your purpose, kind of like what we were talking about with Karen, no matter what position you have a platform, and your purpose can flow from that platform.
Absolutely. And obviously we get down to the foundation being that, whatever you do as unto the Lord. And so I'm thinking about this season of almost a year where it was COVID, and we had just gone through a really difficult time in Illinois from that experience, and I was no longer a pastor in the moment. I knew that I still should be, so I never lost that thought. But I had to make some money, and so I did substitute teaching. And as I taught, sometimes kindergartners, sometimes fifth graders, sometimes
I'd love to see you in a room with kindergartners.
I love kindergartners. Like I'm totally the dad who loves little kids. But
that's awesome.
But as I did that, I found joy in that, because it was in alignment with, God's gifting and calling in my life. And I just tried to do it as unto him. And so we, 3 weeks after everything blew up in our lives and we didn't know what was going to happen, we were at a church in town. And a few weeks later, we were serving in kids ministry. Aaron and I were teaching. So, it doesn't matter where you're at, like you said. It doesn't matter where you're at. You've got a chance to operate in your calling and use the gifting God has given you to glorify him.
Yeah, and again, just the freedom and the hope that this assignment doesn't have to be it, because nothing is guaranteed. Like, really, as far as our positions or our jobs, our resources, or what we have, our possessions. And so, like, if we're so attached to our purpose and our calling being, attached to one of those things, there's a good chance that something's going to shift or be, we're just going to experience the consequences of a fallen, broken world. And so being able to be freed from that and have a hope that transcends, you used that word, I think, earlier, Braden, that transcends what is now and what's in front of us. And that hope connects us with the love and the purpose of God, which forms our identity. And then again, it like you said, Jake, it brings a joy. There is no greater joy than knowing who God is, who you are, and being able to live that out no matter the circumstances and no matter the situations.
Yeah, contentment, and contentment and confidence grow out of that. I no longer, you're not going to be comparing yourself to other people, because you understand your calling and your gifting, and this is your assignment, and they've got a different assignment, and so it helps with that. The fastest way to kill something is to compare it to something else, and so it's just helped me in that. I don't need to be the same, and it's not just if you're listening and you're like, man, I don't know how this affects me as vocationally or whatever. Think of it as a father or a mother, or as a husband or a wife. You're not going to be like that other husband. You're not going to be like that other wife. You're not going to be like that other mom or that other dad. And sometimes we get into this comparison, like, I need to be like them. They're doing good. Therefore, I need to somehow manufacture what they have. But the truth is that God has uniquely gifted and called you. And as a mom, you've got a lane that you can run in that is just right where God wants you. And it will look different than that other mom. I mean, there's some basic stuff like you got to feed them and stuff, but outside of that, so I, as a father, my kids make fun of me because of teachable moments, because I'm always like, it's a teachable moment. Let's talk about this. They're like, teachable moment. And so that's because my gifting and calling is teaching. And so I'm always going to be explaining. That's my thing. So another dad is going to be something different, equally good, but he's going to do it in a different way. And I can be confident in what God has given me, and look at another dad who's also awesome and still be confident because even though I'm different than him.
Yeah.
And so it really can permeate every area, not just vocation, but family and life in general. And it's okay that my thing's not your thing.
Yeah.
And, so.
Well, and it's, and I haven't really realized this until you started talking about comparison and contentment, but, whenever you can understand your calling, you see what the Lord's called you to, there isn't the desire to compare yourself almost decreases or goes away.
Yeah.
It's oh my goodness, the Lord's given me vision for the track I'm supposed to be on.
Mm-hmm.
And what if I used all of that mental energy and all that time that I would have spent comparing myself to a Jake or a Brett or to someone else, and instead I'm using that energy and that time with the Lord, seeing the vision and the track he has for me, and really being driven to continually search that out and continually walk into that.
It absolutely, in my life, it has decreased, the tendency to compare, which I have just like everybody else.
Yeah. And it flares up from time to time, but it's easier to combat it and to recognize it.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I know we could talk a lot on this topic, but I do want to encourage anyone listening, if Jake's story or Braden's story or my story connects with something that you're going through, or you just want to reach out, like, we would love to talk with you and share more details of our story, our past, our journey, and maybe even just help you or even just pray with you about what the Lord has for you. And so I'll put our contacts in the show notes. But Jake, is there anything you want to say last? I will give you the final word other than the outro, because I'll do the typical outro.
God's in your life, Beyonce.
Wow, that was it.
That was it right
100%.
there. I nailed it. I just want to say, to you listening that, God has determined, Acts 17, God has determined, the period of your living, when you're going to live, the boundary of your living space. The book of Psalms says that he formed you in your mother's womb, not just what you look like on the outside, but your inward being. So who you are, how you are, where you are, when you are, was all sovereignly decided by God. Mm-hmm. And so the biggest joy, the greatest satisfaction comes from lining up with how God has sovereignly created me to live and work and continue. Yeah. And so, man, that is a lifelong endeavor, a lifelong journey. And so I just want to encourage you, jump into that and don't kill yourself if you don't have it figured out in 2 days. Just keep going and the Lord will bless you.
Yeah, man, that's good. Gentlemen, thank you for your time and this conversation. Everyone, we hope you have a great week. Be blessed. And remember, God is moving in your life beyond Sundays.